Hello, this is Dana and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. Today's video is the first in a new group of videos that I plan to do called Tidy Tuesday. So each Tuesday I will be trying to find a few plants and show you how I look at them each week to tidy them up. This week there are a ton of plants because I did not do this task for the last few weeks, and so now they've backed up on me a little bit. So what a great time to make a video and show you guys how I do this. So sometimes, well, I guess previously when I had fewer orchids, I would do my tidy tasks at the same time I watered my plants. But what I'm finding now that I've, grown my collection, I'm having more plants to deal with, that I actually, when I water them, I set them all aside. If there's something that needs to be done to them, that falls under the tidy category. So today was watering day for quite a number of the plants, and I checked in with each one even if they didn't need water. And as I, inspected each one when I was watering it, I sat it aside so that I could come back to it and do a particular task that I see needs to be done, just to kind of keep them in good order and looking as healthy as they should. Okay, so we're going to start with a task that actually should have been done prior to repotting the orchid, but I just didn't do it because I thought, well, it's an orchid pot. It has good enough aeration. It has good enough drainage. And now that I'm coming back to these two orchids on a regular basis, I'm seeing now in the winter that they are staying just a little bit too wet for my liking. So they hadn't been watered for about 10 days, and when I looked at them today, the roots were still green, and they probably didn't need water, but I trickled just the tiniest bit around the edges because I knew I wouldn't be looking at them again for a number of days. So I'm really not liking how these pots are not drying out, especially in the winter. So even though these plants have already been put in these pots, it's not too late to go back and add some of the aeration holes in the sides of the pot. These are not my favorite orchid pots these days, but since I have them, I do still use them from time to time. And how I make the aeration holes in my plastic pots is just with a wood burning tool. But of course, now that the plant is in here, we have to be cautious not to poke the wood burning tool in a place where there's root growth. So, as I make the holes in this pot, they're going to seem a bit more random than if I had done this before the plant was in there. Okay, so I have my wood burning tool already hot over here, and this is going to be really random, and I'm going to do this more at the bottom of the pot, and I just poke it through and it makes a hole. Now, I'm kind of guessing that the fumes from this are not great, so I try not to breathe in the fumes if I can avoid it. And believe it or not, just a few holes can make all the difference with the pot's ability to dry out from one watering to the next. Okay, and so that should do it for this one. Now, we will be coming back to this orchid in just a second for another task. But for now, I'm going to set it aside. And I have another pot to do the same thing with. Again, just staying a little bit too wet for my liking in the winter. And be careful where you point the wood burner. You have to be careful not to burn yourself or the orchid leaves. Okay. So that takes care of that. Now, I'm going to set this one aside. This was the only task that I had to do on this orchid. So I'm finished with that one. And I'm going to take a quick break and unplug this smoking wood burner and be back with the rest of the tidy tasks. Okay, now the next plant that needs a little bit of tidy here is a Cattleya type orchid. Rhine-Cattleyanth Pop City. And this one has been under the grow lights since I brought my outdoor orchids in. And there is a ton of new root growth happening in this particular area right here. Now, I repotted this at the end of the spring of last year. So it does not need fresh media. It does not need to be disturbed from this perfectly good potting setup here. However, over the months as I've been watering it, it has, I would say the media has maybe fallen down just a little bit, has kind of settled. And so now these roots are maybe a little bit further away from the media than they might have been early on when I put this orchid in the pot. So it's perfectly okay to take some of the Cattleya bark that you use and just go ahead and supplement at the top of the pot just a little bit so that that new root growth is a little bit closer to the media. And just to kind of even it out on the back side, that's the older part of the plant, so there's no root growth on the back, but just to even it out, I'll add a little bit there as well because the media is a little bit low in the pot. Okay, and so very, very easy to do. You just sort of have to notice that that might be something that your orchid appreciates. Okay, so that's the tidy task for this Cattleya type orchid. I'll put him aside. And then this next orchid is a reed stem epidendrum. Let's see, the name is Kagaribi. Kagaribi. Might be a trade name. I just purchased this at my local garden center. And this one has been under the grow lights as well. It was outside during the spring and summer. And the grow lights have brought out that purplish pigment, the anthocyanin. And for a year now, this orchid has had the bloom spike from the previous year, and it had stayed green this entire time until now. And I left it because I wasn't sure if maybe it would send out a secondary bloom from that same spike. But now that it's dying back, it just needs to be cut away. And I have sterilized and flamed these cutters before using them, so I'm just going to go right here and snip that off. And the new growth for this year is this taller reed stem right here. And if this plant blooms for me in the spring or summer of this year, which I hope it does, the bloom would be coming from the top of this taller stem. So I'm going to move the stake to support that taller stem, and then reclip it so that that particular stem can have the support if it decides to bloom. Now, the other thing that you could do is you could put a dot of cinnamon right here, but when I cut that stem, it's relatively dry already, and since I flamed my cutters, I really doubt that I introduced any sort of pathogen into that cut area, but you could put a dab of cinnamon there if you chose to do that. Okay, so that's the tidy task for the reed stem epidendrum. And then this orchid. Now, the reason I'm showing this one to you is because it's one of my mystery orchids. There was a orchid nursery in Houston, closed years ago now, but if you went there and you purchased orchids, they had all kinds of baby plants, and they would send you away with 2 or 3 baby plants just for having made a purchase. And this was one of those baby plants, I would say maybe 5 or 6 or even 7 years ago now. It has never bloomed for me, but of course I don't know how long it takes for this plant to mature. I'm not even sure what type of orchid it is. This particular orchid nursery did a lot of hybridizing, and I think the baby plants they gave away sometimes were the ones that got mislabeled, or maybe the plants did not grow with the characteristics that they wanted them to. And so they were, I guess, in the hybridizing world, abandoned for that purpose. So, you know, nobody knows what this orchid is. It does tend to make a lot of air roots. It's, you know, putting on new growth now, which is kind of, you know, not the typical thing for a Phalaenopsis type orchid. Although I think this one may be an intergeneric hybrid just because of how it looks. There is a leaf right here, you know, dropping the old leaf off the bottom, and that just separated very, very easy. So I'll go ahead and take that leaf off today to tidy it up. But, you know, it hasn't lost any other leaves, and it's putting on new root growth. So maybe the blooming cycle will be a bit later. I don't know how this one behaves because while it has been thriving as far as leaves and roots go, it has never bloomed. Okay, so let's set this one aside. And the next one that I want to tidy up a little bit is my Maxillaria tenuifolia. Now this one also grew outside spring and summer, has been in under the grow lights, but this is one thing to be careful of with grow lights. Because these grassy leaves are so long, some of these leaves got up in the grow lights. So what I'm going to be doing today is just trimming off the burnt ends. So I need to reflame my cutters. Okay, and this is just, you know, something to kind of be careful of. And you can tell, like on this particular leaf, it must have been just too close to a grow light in that one spot. And then on some of the others, it was the tips that got burned. So I'm just going to be trimming those off. And again, I really don't think cinnamon is required here. There's not a lot of plant juices in those leaves, and I have sterilized the cutters. So that's just the part I'm cutting off. And it only happened in a few places, and now I know to be a bit more careful to keep the top of the grassy leaves out of the lights. So that looks much better now. And so I trimmed off just 4 ends here where they had been burned by the lights. Okay, and then next up we are going to be placing some stakes. So you may have remembered previously in one of my videos I mentioned that the spiking for my Phalaenopsis tends to happen a bit later compared to most other people in the United States. And that's because I'm in a subtropical region. So I'm just now beginning to see really good growth on some Phalaenopsis spikes, and it's time to place the stakes according to how I want these spikes to grow. So on this particular orchid, you can see the spike is happening right here. I'm going to go ahead and want this one to grow sort of in the same plane as the leaves on this side of the plant. So I'll be putting the stake right here. And as far as reusing stakes, yes, I do. However, if they're wooden stakes and they were maybe in a questionable plant or seem to have some, I guess what I would say, deterioration of the wood, I will just throw those away. Some stakes have like a plastic coating on them, and those tend to reuse pretty well. These that are this green color, and you can see the end of that one right there, that one just needs to be thrown away and not reused. Pathogens can get inside of the wood, and you know, as you reuse these, you'll want to spray them with hydrogen peroxide or maybe a little bit of alcohol just to help with any problem that there might be in there. And this orchid I don't think is going to get, you know, super huge or anything. I don't think I need the biggest stake in the world. As I poke it down, I want to try to avoid any roots that I see on the surface, but of course, you know, once you get further down in the pot, you're not quite sure. So you just have to just poke it down. And now this stake is ready for this bloom when it gets a little bit larger. Okay, so that's that tidy task. And then this one, same situation, new spike happening right here. This plant is a bit larger. This one has not bloomed for several years, so I'm excited about it blooming, and I can't for the life of me remember how big this bloom gets. So I think I'm going to be putting a slightly taller stake here. This is a really nice plastic coated stake, however, neither of the two ends has a point. So it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge to put in there. And I really don't want to have to go over to a pencil sharpener and try to sharpen one of the ends. So yeah, that's actually in there really sturdy. So as that spike grows, I will be able to clip it to that stake. Okay, that one's done. And then one more spike here. And this one, if I put this stake in there, that's probably going to be a little bit too short. So let me see if I have another choice here that's a bit taller. Yes, this one should do. Okay. And so there's the spike for that one. The stake for that spike, rather. Okay, let's put that one aside. And, one more Phalaenopsis with the yellow leaf. Now let's see. Okay, that one is not releasing easily. It's not ready to cut loose. There's no reason to tear it and create a wound down at the base of the plant. So we just wait. This one is not ready to disconnect just yet. So I will leave that one for next time. Okay, so those were all of my tidy tasks for this week as I pulled my plants and inspected each one for what I needed to do to keep it in its best shape. If you enjoyed watching this video or learned something new, please click that like button, and the subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.